Good evening, everyone. I would like to begin by welcoming everyone tonight to our Heterodox conversation, and we will be engaging in what cases is it ethically permissible to genetically modify human embryos. So our afternoon, almost evening event is brought to you by student group BridgeCortland, along with our Heterodox Dragons, which is our HXA campus community at SUNY Cortland, and the Galpin Institute for Civic Engagement. Tonight's event is just one event, which is part of our year-long celebration of the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. We have two guests with us tonight. We have Dr. Vukov and we have Dr. Byrne, who will be engaging with us in just a few moments. Our two guests are joining us from Loyola University at Chicago. And we made a conscious decision to keep the introductions very brief because they will be telling you a lot about themselves as part of the presentation. I do get to tell you, however, that Dr. Vukov has earned his doctorate in philosophy from Fordham University, and Dr. Burns earned his doctorate in biochemistry, molecular biology, and biophysics from the University of Minnesota. Before we get into their presentation, one very important aspect of our event is assessment. So I'm going to pop up here before we begin our pre-test for you. So I would like our guest members in the audience to be sure you have your phones. We have our QR code pulled up for you.
All right, it looks like people are starting to migrate away from their phones, so welcome. There's one more slide here. This is the Heterodox way. Great minds don't always think alike. And there are a bunch of points here related to some things you can do to make sure that you're doing things in an intellectually rigorous way. So we're going to start off today. Again, I'm Dr. Burns. This is my colleague, Dr. Vukov.
Hi, everybody.
So just as a heads up, this is not going to be a typical debate or argument, although we do disagree.
We do, in fact, disagree about many things, which will come out, but we're going to be much more conversational than like one person than the other person. It's going to be a lot like this and interrupting each other and making fun of each other.
Yeah, a lot of that is going to be there. And we're actually going to try to talk to you folks too. So sorry if you're uncomfortable about that, but buckle up. It'll be fun. All right, so here is the topic. A little bit more about us. So as Jill indicated, I am a biologist. So my training is in cancer biology specifically. I do bioinformatics these days, which is using computer science and statistics applied to large genomic and metagenomic data sets. And Joe does something else for a living.
Yeah, so I'm trained as a philosopher from Fordham University, but I've sort of migrated to doing a lot of philosophy of technology and often in conversation with theology. So I kind of have a little bit in theology, a little bit in technology, and a little bit still in philosophy. So we have very different disciplinary backgrounds. We also have very different, although you'll see there's some places where we overlap, but we have fairly different backgrounds as far as what viewpoints we bring to things. So I am a relatively conservative-leaning Catholic, and Burns is exactly the same, right, Burns?
That's right. I'm definitely not some sort of atheist reincarnation of Karl Marx. That is probably a more accurate description. I'm being hyperbolic. That's not actually what I think. But I am an atheist. Joe's a pretty devout Catholic. And that colors the way that we see the world. It definitely influences the way that we see things, which is going to come up throughout the course of the evening for sure.
If you do the next slide, Michael. We've actually this isn't just a one-off thing for us. So Michael and I have been teaching a course together at Loyola for about 4 years, but we've been working together doing debates, hosting discussion groups, doing lectures, things like that for about a decade at this point. So this is the course right here where we are standing, looking very engaged with this, a little bit posed looking, but engaging with some of our students.
By the way, this isn't actually a real class.
Yeah. But we've been doing this sort of thing for quite a while, and a big part of the reason we do it is that we enjoy the kinds of values that are central to the HXA way that Michael just showed. Is we actually met at faculty orientation. Turns out that we grew up about 30 miles from each other, never knew each other, but both grew up in rural Minnesota. Faculty orientation's going on about a decade ago, and we hear, that guy sounds like he's got an accent similar to mine. So we introduced ourselves, hit it off, realized that, number one, we disagreed about a whole bunch of different stuff, but also loved debating and arguing about all that stuff. So we quickly became friends, and then thought, wouldn't this be even better if we could invite other people to the party? So that's what we've done a lot of the last 10 years, is trying to figure out different ways and different venues to have conversations with other people as well.
Sure. I'll just put a finer point on this too. One of the reasons why this works is because we're actually friends. We hang out with each other, even though we disagree. And the way that one does that is not that we sing Kumbaya and say, we're both right about everything, Joe. It's totally fine. Everything's totally cool. We just need to coexist together. The answer is actually an inverse of that, which is we're actually both wrong about stuff, okay? Joe, how confident are you that you're 100% accurate in everything you believe?
Not very.
Not very confident. Me either. Okay, so that means that because we're aware, we have the self-awareness to reflect upon, like, I am not sure that I'm 100% accurate in everything that I believe. How do I know which things I'm wrong about? And obviously, one way to do that is you find someone who disagrees with you that you respect and respects you, and you have a good faith argument back and forth. And I listen to you because I believe you when you say you believe those things.
Even though we don't agree.
Even though we don't agree.
Yeah. And we've joked for years that we do enough stuff together that we were just gonna put bunks into Burns's lab and just move in together and just like spend all our time together. And we haven't made that happen yet, but we actually did spend a whole month together this June at University of Notre Dame, where we had a fellowship together. We didn't have the shared bunk room together, but we had a shared office. So we spent a lot of time together.
Yeah, anyway.
All right, on to the lecture.
Enough about us.
So here's the proposal we want to consider for you today. There are circumstances in which it is morally permissible to genetically engineer human embryos. So again, this isn't going to be a traditional debate, but that's the proposition on the table for tonight. And it turns out that Michael and I do have different stakes and different stances in response to that proposal. But in order to get there, we both agree that it's really important that you understand a little bit about the science of genetic engineering, and also that we provide you with a little bit of framework of some of the ethical considerations. So eventually we'll get to where we fall on the actual question about genetically engineering human embryos. But we're going to take a step back for a little bit before we get there, so we can see what exactly the foundations are on which we can have this debate. So that's the outline. We're going to look at the science, we're going to look at the ethics, and then finally we're going to have some case studies. And just as a trailer, the case studies are where we're going to ask you for just a little bit of involvement. So you get to sit back and relax for the first 2/3 of this. The last third, we're going to ask you for your own contributions. Michael, take it away with the science.
All right, so this is where the interdisciplinary stuff comes in. There's nothing that makes me more, frustrated or upset is when I hear people, a lot of times philosophers, talking and postulating about scientific topics when they very clearly don't understand what they're talking about. Right, Joe? It happens once in a while. So we're going to jump in with some really, this is big picture, your first introduction to genetic engineering. I'm going to be glossing over huge swaths of the literature because I'm going to try to condense this all down into like 5-10 minutes, okay? The first thing I want to highlight is that the genome is a very, very big place. So I actually brought a prop. This is going to be fun. Here you go, Joe. Go ahead and untangle that for me. Okay. All right. The genome is a really, really big place. You have something like 6 billion nucleotides, which is just a big number, right? So 6 billion nucleotides, which are A's and C's and T's and G's in the DNA that make up your genome, which means that if you took all of those chromosomes and you laid them end to end as an actual molecule, it would be about 2 meters. So that would be like about yay tall. So that's, but it's very thin because it's only like, a double-stranded helix thick. So as an illustration, I brought this piece of little twine rope here, this yellow stuff, and this is about 10 meters long. But you can see it, right? So this was that scale. So we would need about 400,000 of these, and that's how big your genome is, okay? That's to scale. This is about 4 millimeters thick, which would be, we'd have to take this piece of cord and run it all the way to Chicago and back to Syracuse 4 times. That's how big the genome is. Okay, the genome is absolutely humongous, and this becomes relevant when we start talking about why your cells freak out when certain things happen. There you go, Joe. Stuff that in your pocket. I'm sure it won't get tangled up. All right, genetic engineering. Who's done it, and where, and why? We have 2 pioneers in the field right here. One of these folks, this guy right here.
You'll notice that if you want to go into genetic engineering, you have to buy a certain kind of glasses and also grow your beard in a certain way.
Yeah, it is a thing. So this right here, this guy's name is Attenborough. Anybody heard of Attenborough before? You've probably heard of David Attenborough, though,
You've
right?
heard the guy's voice before.
Yeah, he's a naturalist. This is not David Attenborough. This is Robert Attenborough, it's his brother. And it turns out his brother was in the 1993 classic Jurassic Park.
For those of you for whom 1993 is the distant past, you really should go back and watch it. This was one of the crowning achievements of the 90s, was this movie.
Yes, it's an excellent movie, and they've made, what, like 7 or 8 of them now? I don't know. They made a whole bunch of them. This is from the first one. And he plays the geneticist who was responsible for stuff. This guy over here, this is George Church. And George Church actually predates this fellow, because George Church has been a geneticist at Harvard since the 80s. And he's doing tons of genomics work right now, working on editing embryos of different organisms. So in Jurassic Park, we have dinosaurs, obviously. Attenborough fictionally was responsible for bringing back T-Rex and a bunch of other dinosaurs, whereas George Church has brought back, or started to bring back, a couple extinct species. So one of them would be the woolly mammoth. And they're starting with mice, so that's actually a mouse that's transgenic because it's a mouse that's got a transgene, which is from mammoth DNA. So they actually have incorporated some woolly mammoth DNA into that mouse, which is why it looks particularly fuzzy. And then the plan will be that eventually, once they learn more about the genes using mice, they'll transplant those genes, doing embryonic genetic engineering, into elephants to bring back woolly mammoths, sort of. We can talk about that later. But, and then over here we have a couple little puppies, and those puppies, again, those are not normal puppies, those are dire wolves. So you may have seen this in the news. George Church's company Colossal brought back dire wolves, an extinct species of wolves that are big and adorable. And again, giant asterisk, are these actually dire wolves, or are they just genetically engineered wolves? Here is Colossal's website. I actually made a video of it, and this is what their website is. There's a lot going on. There's wolves running and getting fed. This is just what happens when you go to the website. You can pull this up on your phone right now. This is not like a typical scientist's website, okay? This is not, I'm sure your faculty, if you take science classes and you go to their lab website, this is not what's happening. And the reason is because this research is actually all funded by venture capitalist money. This is not funded by the government. This is not funded by the FDA or the NIH or NSF. They just recently got an infusion of $200 million for this company called Colossal. I think their market value is something like $2.1 billion, which is a lot of money. And it's all geared toward de-extinctifying different species. So there's the woolly mammoth, there's dire wolves, there's some extinct birds, and so forth. And the question is why? What are you going to do with that? And I think we actually already answered the question when I showed you the Jurassic Park thing. We've actually done this in humans. And by we, I mean specifically this fellow, okay? This is Dr. Jiankyu He. Dr. He goes by JK, I believe. But he actually, in 2018, posted a YouTube video from his lab and was very enthusiastic and happy to announce that he had successfully genetically engineered the embryos of 2 little girls who had been born. And it was a little bit... You should go
and watch the video. This screenshot captures it very well, but he is very enthusiastic. You can tell he thought, I am getting the Nobel Prize for this research.
It's great, yeah. So he's like, you're welcome. I did it. It's great. I'm a genius.
It turns out there was a slightly different outcome.
Yeah, it didn't quite work, and he went to prison. So that's the takeaway. The 2 things about this. So the first one was he spent 3 years in prison in China and had to pay something like $500,000 in fines for a variety of mostly ethics paperwork fraud. So he was basically lying to people about what he was doing in order to get it done, including the parents of the children and some of the clinicians he was working with. And also, unfortunately, the experiment didn't quite work as intended. So he had genetically engineered these two little girls' embryos to make them resistant to HIV. That was the rationale behind it. But the genetic engineering didn't quite work exactly as intended. So these children are now, they're still anonymous, but I guarantee you they are being exhaustively studied to make sure that there are no negative health consequences. There's also apparently a third child in 2019 who was born who had gone through a similar project that Dr. He was pushing through, but there's much less information about that. All right. So those are some examples of embryonic engineering, right? So we've got crazy de-extinctifying, huge venture capital money being invested into it. There's all sorts of other stuff that Dr. Church is doing, like making artificial wombs, right? So you don't have to grow animals inside of a mother. You can just grow them in a sack. But these two right here, this is Emmanuel Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna. Down here, they won the Nobel Prize in 2020 for the technical bits, for like, how do we even do this? Okay, so they were sort of the pioneers behind CRISPR-Cas9 technologies. Anybody heard of CRISPR before? Yeah. So CRISPR is like the new hotness in genetic engineering. And it turns out that human cells expend a lot of effort maintaining their genomes. And one reason why I had Dr. Vukov play with some string earlier is to illustrate the point that within a single cell, there is an absolute boatload of linear DNA that's in there, which means that your cell really does a lot of work to make sure that it's all being sort of processed properly and stored properly, because anytime anything weird happens with that, you're gonna end up with weird snarls. Things aren't going to separate properly when a cell divides, and you can have all sorts of strange mutations. And it turns out that CRISPR technology actually hijacks that effort to do things that we want. All right, so here's a technical figure. This is the only technical figure you're going to see, don't worry. So up at the tippy top, we have double-stranded DNA. So that's dsDNA, so that's 2 strands of your DNA. And then in the green, there's that little wiggly piece, and that's called a guide RNA. So it's a single-stranded guide RNA. And the guide RNA, the green piece, and the big sort of bean-looking Cas9 thing, those two together make up CRISPR-Cas9, okay? And all that guide RNA is doing is that a researcher in the laboratory could say, there's a region in this humongous genome that I would like to target. Okay, so as a researcher, I could say, I want to target a region of the mouse gene that looks like the mammoth gene, but I want to make a change at that site, so I'm going to make a guide RNA that's complementary to that site. That guide RNA will find that region in the genome, and then it brings its friend Cas9 along, and Cas9 acts as a pair of scissors. That's what those little red things are, and it makes a double-stranded break. So it cuts the DNA into 2 pieces, and your cell freaks out. Your cell's like, absolutely not. We cannot have this long strings of DNA. We can't have them get broken. We need to put them back together. So it's going to use a repair pathway, and it's just going to fix it. It's going to stick those 2 right back together again, as good as new, most of the time. The vast majority of the time, it's totally going to work. Unfortunately for the cell, CRISPR-Cas9, so that guide RNA and the Cas9 are still there, and they still recognize that sequence, so they're going to cut it again. And then your cell's going to repair it again. And then CRISPR-Cas9 is going to cut it again, and then it'll repair it again, and they'll just keep going back and forth. The thing that stops it is when the sequence of the DNA changes. Okay? As soon as the double-stranded DNA changes its sequence, that guide RNA won't recognize it anymore. You've made a change. All right, what are the possible outcomes? So it could be that you want to break a gene, and this is what Dr. He did when he was genetically engineering humans to try to make them resistant to HIV. He was finding a gene that helps HIV infect a cell, and he was trying to disrupt it. So he was just trying to break the gene. And he in some instances, he did that a little bit. But you can break a gene, and then the other thing that you can do is you can add another piece, which is donor DNA. And this is the type of stuff that Dr. Church is doing with Colossal, which is where they'll find a region of the genome that they would like to stick a mammoth gene, and they will take a little chunk of DNA and include that, which is the mammoth DNA, into this mixture with the CRISPR-Cas9. And when the mammoth DNA gets incorporated, the Cas9 and the guide RNA don't recognize it anymore. Bing, bang, boom, you've made the change that you want. Again, giant asterisk though, because it turns out that while these are intended consequences, any consequence where you change the DNA so that it's not recognized also works. And those are what you actually see, which means there are tons and tons of opportunities for unintended consequences when you're doing this type of thing, which is why they always have to do screening afterwards to make sure that the thing that they were hoping for is the thing that they actually got. This is going to come back later. All right. One question you could have is, how do we get guide RNA, Cas9, these proteins, and maybe some donor DNA, how do you actually get them into an embryo? So if we're talking about a fertilized egg, what they will normally do is they will harvest an egg from a mouse, say, or a wolf. They'll harvest an egg, they'll harvest sperm, they'll put them together in a petri dish, and they'll find that fertilized egg, and they'll grab it with a pipette. So this thing over here is a magnified pipette, that's a fertilized egg, and that thing coming on the side there is an incredibly fine needle. So they're literally just gonna give this thing a shot, and here's a video of it. Yep, there it goes. And they literally will just straight up directly inject these components into a fertilized egg. There it goes. It's right around the time of year for everybody to get their flu shot. It's like this, but just much smaller. And now it's done. If there were CRISPR and the guide RNA and some donor DNA in there, that would be hard at work right there. All right. Final piece. We're talking about embryonic engineering, and the reason that embryonic engineering is incredibly powerful is because that one little injection right there did a ton of work for us. Because this fertilized egg is going to turn into, eventually, if that was a human, into a full-fledged human being. And every single cell in that human being is going to have that genetically modified DNA from that one event. That makes germline or embryonic engineering way, way, way easier to do than somatic cell engineering. So in other words, if you have a full-blown adult already and you want to change the genome of the cells in your body, your somatic cells, like your muscle cells and skin cells and so forth, there's a lot of them. Okay, so the difference between this is a one cell. Over here, a typical human body's got about 30 trillion cells in it. You're not going to do a microinjection of even a fraction of those. We use other mechanisms for getting the DNA in, but it's nowhere near as efficient. So if you want to cut right to the chase, embryonic engineering is where it's at. Somatic cells, slightly different. And with that, Dr. Vukov is going to tell us some more about the ethics.
All right. So I want to really pick up where Michael left off and build a lot of the ethical considerations we're going to talk about on the biological facts and the techniques that Michael's presented to us. The first thing to note, and this last thing that Michael left off on, this distinction between somatic genetic engineering and germline genetic engineering has been a really crucial one, not only in the biological literature, but also in the ethics literature. So just to make sure everyone's clear on it, germline is where you're genetically engineering a human embryo. Somatic engineering is where you're engineering cells in a tissue of a grown organism, right? And both of these things have been talked about, but it turns out that somatic genetic engineering is already going on and is largely uncontroversial. So there are some people who think that there's something really morally problematic with genetically engineering tissue cells. Most ethicists don't, though. So if that's you, that's fine. We'd love, the more the merrier. We'd love to hear your perspective on it. Michael and I both agree that there's nothing particularly wrong with somatic genetic engineering because it's kind of like it's a new technique, and there's going to be some risks and there's going to be some rewards, and figuring out when it's going to be okay to do is largely going to track the way that you would evaluate the ethics of any other medical intervention, right? You're just changing the genetics in certain cells, in certain tissues. And in fact, if you just look this up, which I did ahead of this talk, you can find a whole bunch of different headlines of this currently going on. So this is not like a far future thing. This is something that's going on right now. So here was a recent headline, gene editing therapy to treat blindness. Here was a headline for treatment of hearing loss. And this was one for there was a very rare personal disorder that they used, and they were able to treat this little girl for this really rare disorder. Again, some ethicists have a problem with this. Most ethicists, I would say, are on the same page in saying somatic genetic engineering, perfectly morally okay. Where things get a little dicier is when it comes to germline genetic engineering. So again, this is where we're genetically engineering a human embryo. As Michael showed to us, right, it's much more effective because you change the embryo and then the adult is going to have completely altered DNA. So it's easier in that way, but it's also an ethically thornier territory to be in. So what I want to do is walk you through several objections and several ethical considerations that philosophers and ethicists and biologists have raised specifically to germline gene editing. So we're narrowing our focus here just a little bit. Here's the first one, is that germline gene editing poses significant individual and population level risks. The individual risks first. Michael just presented to you how CRISPR-Cas9 works, and also showed you how, because you can't totally control for how that gene is going to repair itself, that it opens up the door for random mutations to occur, and that will stop the CRISPR-Cas9 from working, but it's not the thing that you intended. So even if you didn't get all the technical details, the important part is that you can have unintended consequences, and it's an imperfect technology, right? I can go to make the mouse a woolly mouse, whatever you want to call it, and instead it just doesn't work, and instead you give it some disease. You make something wrong go with it, right? It's a really important thing to think about. I actually think individual level risk here of genetically engineering individual human embryos is not super important, or not super ethically important, because I take it that individual level risk is something that accompanies basically any medical procedure that you undergo. Right? There's always going to be risk to any of it. We have really good ethics practices that say, here's how you balance risks and rewards, and if it's too risky, you shouldn't do it. If it's got the rewards, then think about chemotherapy. Any medical intervention you undergo is going to have certain risks, certain rewards. I think we can just use our existing ethics to kind of make that balance. So I don't think that's the really important one. What I rather think is really important, and what a lot of ethicists have thought is really important, is this idea of population level risk. So think through this. Let's say that we start genetically engineering human embryos at a really large rate, right? So that there's thousands of babies being born who are genetically engineered. Let's say a percentage of those, there's been some unintended consequences, right? There's these novel mutations that you didn't try and make happen. What happens when you fast forward now, right? So we've got 2% of these thousands of babies being born with these random genetic mutations. Fast forward 20, 30 years, they start having children of their own. What happens is all of a sudden those mutated genes enter into the gene pool. And pretty soon, you've got this population level risk in which you've got these mutated, potentially very harmful genes entering the gene pool and wreaking all kinds of havoc. This is, in fact, one reason, this is a little bit of a spoiler, this is one reason why currently there actually isn't much ethical debate around whether we should immediately start genetically modifying human embryos. Almost everyone looks to this reason and says, we don't want to mess up the gene pool. And that's why Dr. J.K. went to prison. And basically it was remarkable. I work in bioethics, and bioethicists, we love having debates. When they sent Dr. J.K. to prison, basically everyone, left, right, middle, any side of the aisle, scientists, ethicists, they all said, yeah, that dude really messed up because of this, right? Like, we don't want to enter all these random mutations into the gene pool. There's also, though, another nearby ethical consideration that gets discussed less that also has to do with population level risk. And this has to do with if we succeed at genetically modifying embryos at a mass scale. And what happens here is, if we start doing that, it's likely that we're going to try and be selecting for certain kinds of traits, right? So you can kind of start imagining what the perfect designer baby might look like. Maybe very tall, maybe very strong, right? We want really good athletes. We want them to be smart, right? Genetically modified to, try and get that IQ bumped up, get the muscle mass bumped up, and so on and so forth. It turns out that, for reasons that we're going to talk about in just a second, I think that's ethically problematic. It also turns out that it's biologically problematic, because the more that we homogenize the gene pool, the less resilient the human gene pool becomes. It turns out, to give a call back to HXA and heterodoxy, a heterodox gene pool is biologically much more robust than a homogeneous gene pool. And I'm going to bring Michael back in here for a second to make a point in kind of an interesting way. Hopefully you can see what's going on here. Michael can explain why he advised me to throw in a picture of a whole bunch of swimsuit people.
Anybody know who these sweaty people in their underwear are? Yeah. Anybody seen these photos before?
Anyone have a guess of who these people are?
Yeah, who are they? Athletes from different sports, that's correct. This is a bunch of people who are, I believe these are the United States Olympians from all these different sports. And obviously, there's one perfect one, right? Like that's the take. No, the takeaway is there is a absolute huge diversity of people. There's tall, short, skinny, not skinny, muscular, more svelte, whatever. It's all over the place, and this is what peak physical human performance looks like, okay? Which means that there's not just like one thing, okay? It actually requires diversity for us to even be competitive on the world stage. The other important thing that I really like about this figure is that this is only physical characteristics. This doesn't say anything whatsoever about like, which one of these people is the best parent? Which one of these people is the best scientist? Which one of these people is going to come up with the next cure for cancer? Or, you know, take your pick, right? The answer is we don't know. And the solution to we don't know is we're going to diversify. Diversity is actually a superpower that human beings have. It turns out that we actually all intuitively know this already, right? I don't want to be crass about this, but you folks have heard of sex before. It turns out that there's a purpose for sexual reproduction, and the purpose of sexual reproduction is to diversify the gene pool. That's the whole point. It was this evolutionary thing that popped up about 2 billion years ago, which gave the creatures that use sexual sort of recombination the ability to compete in a way that other things that did not use that diversification technique, the ability to really thrive, right? So the big takeaway that Joe was getting at here is one of the things that people a little bit sketched out about is if everyone's going to make a designer baby and there's suddenly all these trends and fads that are in place.
You suddenly eliminate this, which is one of the strengths of the human gene pool to begin with.
Right.
So this first point then, this part about population level risk, whether it goes wrong and we have all these random mutations entering the gene pool, or it goes right and we homogenize the gene pool to the point where it becomes unhealthy, are both kind of ethics considerations building off the biology of it. What I want to do now is turn to some more explicitly ethical considerations. Here's one that you might think about, and when I teach this, students will raise this point a lot, is that inevitably, if we start creating designer babies, again, genetically modifying human embryos, so we're not talking somatic here, we're talking about embryos, not tissues, is that it's inevitable that that procedure will be unfairly and unjustly distributed, right? Who's gonna have access to this kind of technology? Who's gonna be pursuing it? People in Silicon Valley, people on Wall Street, people that grew up where Michael and I did in rural Minnesota, probably not so much. I think it's a really important consideration to bring out there. I actually think that personally, and again, we can have a debate about this, it actually doesn't bother me that much. That might sound horrible. Is Joe saying he doesn't care about justice and fairness? Of course I care about justice and fairness. Rather, all technologies and all new technologies, and especially all new medical technologies, are inevitably unjustly and unfairly distributed. Right? Organ donation, chemotherapy, all of it was unjustly distributed initially, and eventually it becomes maybe a little bit more democratized. Not completely, but a little bit more. Does that mean we shouldn't pursue it? I would say no. So this is a consideration that's an important one. I ultimately don't think it gives us reason not to pursue germline genetic modification. Here's just a quick story for you. One of my favorite philosophers on this is this guy, John Harris. And he tells this story about what he calls synthetic sunshine. And synthetic sunshine is a way of making strange for us the existence of electric lighting. And he runs an argument and says, when synthetic sunshine was first developed, was it unjustly distributed? No doubt, right? You had to have electricity in your house, and only rich people could have electricity in their house. Was it unfair? Very unfair. Did it change the nature of society? Did it change the nature of our working lives? Check and check. And yet, he argues, It wasn't bad that we adopted electrical lighting. Moreover, eventually it got democratized. So all that's to say is that this is a really important consideration. The way in which the resource gets distributed is important, but I don't know if it's the nail in the coffin. Here's where I start getting a little bit more hesitant. It's important to make a distinction, I think, between gene editing that's done for therapeutic reasons versus gene editing that's done for enhancement reasons. That's a subtle distinction here, but roughly a therapy is something that brings something back to healthy levels of functioning, while an enhancement is something that tries to take something beyond healthy levels of functioning. Classic example, I wear glasses because I can't see a thing without them. My glasses are a therapy. They give me healthy eyesight. Contrast that with when I use binoculars, let me see far beyond what a human being could normally see. That's an enhancement. So enhancements aren't always bad. But I think when it comes to creating designer babies and genetically modifying human embryos, there is a problem. Why? Well, when we start to envision what we might enhance an embryo to be like, when we think about what's the perfect designer baby, I think we think of sort of a lot of stereotypical things, right? We think of very strong, very fast, high IQ, somebody who's maybe tall, maybe has sort of paradigmatic features of what contemporary society says is beauty. You can kind of make this list. I think what that list ultimately does is it implicitly endorses a certain way of life as being the paradigmatic good human life. And I think if you actually list that out, you realize wait, so in saying that this is the paradigmatic good human life, we're saying that people who don't live that kind of life are somehow falling short. I mean, newsflash, that's all of us, but it's also especially people who are poor or vulnerable or marginalized. I do a lot of work in the Catholic intellectual tradition, and in that tradition we talk about the preferential option for the poor, which is just a fancy way of saying that when we make ethical decisions, we need to pay particular attention to the poor and vulnerable. And I think that when we start thinking about designer babies, that's sort of flipping that script and saying we need to pay particular attention to the people who have the most power and that kind of way of living. So I think when we start talking about germline genetic modification, it often has this misguided, implicit commitment to what a good human life looks like that is a commitment that we should really call into question. Here's the last one, and then we've got case studies for everybody. This is maybe the most controversial, and this is, as you'll see, one of the places where Michael and I really disagree. I think that germline gene editing, so genetically modifying human embryos, is itself a problematic action, even if you're doing it for good outcomes, even if you've mitigated the risks, even if you've taken care of all the worries about diversifying the human genome, all those things. I still think that it's intrinsically problematic. And I'm going to try and make the case for you really quickly for that. Part of the case depends on the idea that not only the consequences of an action, but the action itself can be something morally wrong or morally right, depending on things other than the consequences. And here's a way to make that point. Suppose that after the forum here, we're walking out the back door, and Michael pushes me from behind and sends me sprawling out in the lobby.
It's tradition.
It's tradition. After every talk, he does this, right? So he does it again. I look back and I say, Michael, what's up, man? And first scenario, he says, oh, sorry, Joe. We woke up really early. We did. We woke up at 3:30 today to get here from Chicago. Woke up early, and I just kind of stumbled and kind of knocked into you falling out the door. It's okay. Maybe you should kind of watch where you're going, but I get it. That wasn't that, that's fine. Suppose, though, by contrast, he says, you really riled me up in there, Joe. You were saying all these false things. I was just getting so mad, I had to take it out on you, and I pushed you out the door. I think most of us would say, Michael's kind of a jerk. We're friends, so I can give him a hard time like this, right? What does that show? It shows, among other things, that the intention of the action matters. So that even though the consequences are the same, maybe I bruise my knees when I fall on the ground, whether or not Michael was trying to push me out the door, or whether he wasn't, is important to how we think about the action. So all that's to try and show you is that things other than consequences matter when we're evaluating actions. Here's what I worry about when it comes to genetically modifying human embryos. I believe that humans are bearers of intrinsic dignity, that we owe each other basic respect, that we ourselves have rights, because humans are intrinsically valuable. Like we're the reason that other people should treat us the way that we do. We are the foundation for ethics itself. And I worry that part of what genetic engineering embryos does is it treats that embryo, that human being, as a product rather than as a human being. And in doing so, my argument is that it's intrinsically immoral in that it's violating the basic human dignity of the person that you're modifying. And you're basically, I think that Burns and I were debating this for like hours on the way over here, but that in gene editing, you're very literally making a baby, right? You're creating a baby, and in doing that, you're treating the baby as a product to be made and not as a human being. So none of this is to say that if that child grows up, right, and is now a human being, that person would be any less valuable than any of us, right? No, it would still have human dignity and all that. We would still owe it basic rights and all those things. Rather, the very act of the genetic modification is treating it as something other than a human being. And for that reason, that action is intrinsically problematic. All right, so that's the last argument. We are now going to shift to a new phase in this presentation that will involve some of your involvement. So you should all gear up. The first one won't, so we can just talk you through the first one. But then get ready, you're gonna have to think through some stuff. We might even call on some people. That's where we're turning to now. And we've kind of mocked up some case studies that we think will both get at the ways in which Michael and I approach this in different ways, but also will help hopefully get your wheels turning about how you might disagree with each other, and how your view here might be a little bit more nuanced than just yes, all or nothing. So here's the first one.
All right, so here's the first one, and these are very simple.
We're not going to ask you to discuss this one because this one's pretty uncontroversial.
Okay, so this one is case study 1. Right now, let's edit some human embryos to give them a biological advantage, whatever that happens to be.
So maybe it's HIV resistance, maybe it's like being super tall.
Obviously, we want to make everyone super swole, so we're going to knock out the myostatin gene, which would totally do it, by the way.
We're going to show you how we vote. So by the way, this is the way, I'm very proud of the animations in this slideshow. We're going to have, at every case study, our faces will be in the middle, and we won't show you which direction we float until you've had to discuss this for yourselves. So here we are, and we're also going to include our buddy, Dr. JK here.
All right, so the idea here is, Joe, why don't you trigger the animation, you dork? All right, here we go. So it turns out that both Joe and I are like, this is probably a terrible idea.
It also turns out that the almost entire science and ethics community would be hanging out with us over there.
Okay. On the scientific side and the universal thing that I think everyone can agree on regardless of your ethical framework is right now, the unintended consequences, the potential for unintended consequences at both the individual and population level are far too high for us to be doing this, okay?
Yeah. So you can set aside all the sort of intrinsic problematic action, is this committed to a wrongful view of the human good? Right now everyone's like, in some ways that doesn't matter, it's just way too risky, we shouldn't do it.
Yeah, in other words, CRISPR is really cool and gets a lot of really cool press, as it should. It's a really cool technology. It is by no means perfect. It makes mistakes all the time. And we know about those, and people who do this type of work are like, yeah, it works way better than the previous technology we had, but it is not 100%. So
to make this point too is that it was after Dr. JK, there was a big article that appeared, and I forget which journal it was on, but it was calling for a moratorium on human germline genetic engineering, right? And that was just like the title of the paper, right? It was like a one-page paper, we call for a moratorium, as in no one should do this. And I don't think Dwadna signed off on it, but Emmanuel Charpentier, one of the creators of CRISPR-Cas9, was like, oh, no, we can't be doing this on embryos right now. Mm-hmm. So it was big name scientists, big name ethicists, the who's who list was all against.
Right. They also
obviously, JK.
Yeah. Also, there was a weird phenomenon that happened where he went to jail not because he genetically modified embryos, because there was no law against that, because why would you make a law for a thing that sounds like science fiction? He went to jail because he committed fraud. He violated a whole bunch of ethics protocols. As soon as that happened, though, in China and several other countries, they actually did push through the legislature, you can't do this, this is a criminal act, and here's why. Yeah. Interestingly enough—
What are those question marks going on below
so
Dr.
those question
JK?
marks are, Dr. He is out of prison, so he's out of prison, and He is a successfully and gainfully employed researcher, very interested in studying genetic modification of embryos, but he is focusing more on animals right now, and then question mark stuff related to human embryos. And you're like, who in the heck would hire him, and where's he getting money from? And the answer is undisclosed dark money donors that are very likely to be tech billionaires are paying him lots and lots of money to fund this type of research.
So we don't know who those people are, but he is not just coughing up all this money to do this research from nowhere. So presumably there are some people who also are for this. They just are not in the public eye in the way our friend Dr. JK is. Mm-hmm. All right, here's where things get a little trickier, and here's where the audience participation bit comes in. Case study number 2, Dr. Burns.
All right. Perk your ears up. This could be good.
Yeah, there's a few moving parts here, so really pay attention to this.
20 years from now, so in the future, we solve the technical glitches. Totally fine. For some reason, it's always 20 years, and we'll have it figured out. And take into account the need for biodiversity. Germline gene editing is spectacularly expensive, so it's still like crazy difficult engineering problem to do. But it's available for everybody with money to purchase it for their kids, but only for therapeutic reasons. Okay, so in other words, there's an FDA-approved set of things that you can totally do. You just have to have hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay for it. And they're not going to do it to make you a designer baby. They're going to do it to make sure your kid, I don't know, doesn't have Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, for instance, some therapeutic thing.
So only the rich people are doing it. It's only for therapy, but it is embryos. It's not tissues.
All right, so here's what we're going to do, because you guys have been sitting here for a while. We're going to ask you if you are able to stand up. Okay, stretch your legs out, get some blood flowing, and then we're going to do this really awkward thing. We're going to ask you to chat with people around you. Grab 1 or 2 people around you, and we would like you to see if you can come up with some arguments that you personally think are compelling for or against this particular proposition.
Okay. Once you found your people to chat with, you can sit back down. Just like if you were sort of off by yourself, like move your body and go find somebody to chat with. We'll give you just like 3 minutes.
Take it away. Solve the problem. All right, we're going to come back together, and we are going to ask, actually, we were going to say use the microphone, but I'll just echo back what you say, if you wouldn't mind. Do we have one group of people? And we were going to ask for someone to speak, and we know that this is not what you think, this is what the morons you were talking to thought, so no pressure whatsoever.
Eventually we'll hang around afterwards. We'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on this. What we're going to do is like 1 person per case study.
Yeah, does anybody want to be brave? What did you folks think? And again, it doesn't, you probably agree with one of us, so, you know. Take your pick. Yeah,
if you don't mind, if you step up to the mic, everyone will be able to hear you.
Sure.
Yay! Round of applause.
It is not on.
I bet it will be.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Great. What were your thoughts on this?
Okay,
your group's
so
thoughts?
our group kind of collectively said we'd be in favor. It seemed pretty neutral. There was no problems with it. We think as long as it's accessible and as long as it's only for therapeutic reasons, there wouldn't be many issues. A point that I had brought up before is I had disagreed at first because I thought we had other options like vaccines that I feel like in my head I kind of correlated it to doing the same thing or serving a similar purpose, but overall we think it'd be fine.
Okay, so there was agreement on your group's front. Thank you very much, by the way. There's agreement on your
Another
group's
round of
front.
applause. Very good.
Thank you. Yes. And obviously, Joe, would you like to move to the next?
We'll get to everyone at least afterwards, and there'll be more opportunities to share.
You can answer the next one for sure. Yeah.
So here's where Burns and I lie.
Yeah, you obviously came to the correct answer, so congratulations.
Yeah. Congratulations.
That was the appropriate way.
Yeah, so I mean, my responses here are going to be kind of boring. I'll try and give you a different flavor for each of them, but I think it's just wrong no matter what the circumstances are. In this case, maybe the interesting thing is Michael and I both talked about this coming over, and we agreed that the financial disparities, so we actually are both committed to, this is like a different debate, but we both have like economic, social views that like actually get kind of riled up at big social disparities. But in this case, it just seems to be kind of the nature of new technologies, such that I don't think it's an ethical reason to say no to it. So here I've just kind of fall back and say, no, I think it's intrinsically violates human dignity by treating a person as a product. And that's the reason I'm not cool with it. But a lot of the other stuff, right, the fact that it's so, but I could very easily see somebody saying, no, like if it's only available to the rich, it should be democratically distributed, and that's reason enough not to offer it.
Yeah, so I think the calculus in my head is risk-benefit analysis, it seems like there's relatively low risk for the possibility of reducing the suffering of that child. But
All right, we're going to switch it up a little bit.
don't
Case
worry,
study
these,
number 2.
These get harder.
They get harder.
All right.
We are now fast forwarding 10 years. It's 30 years from now.
Yeah. 30
Germline gene editing is not only safe, it's fantastically inexpensive. We were talking, it's like you can go to the strip mall and it's like going to a Claire's. Instead of picking out like your cheap pair of earrings, you can instead like pick out your designer baby on an iPad, right? So it's gotten fantastically inexpensive. Anyone can do it. Moreover, parents can design their baby to have any traits they want. So this is not just therapeutic anymore, right? So yeah, if you don't want your kid to have X, Y, or Z genetic abnormality, you can give them some upgraded immunity even better than your average human. Strength, sure. Throw in some extra strength genes. Kid's gonna be ripped. Height, right? Want them to be 6'5", 6'6", you pick your height. Why not? Feathers? I mean, just you pick it. You know, you want the trait in your kid, you get to give it to them. What do you think about this? The strip mall version of genetic engineering where it's very cheap, wide open, and you can do whatever you want. You literally just go in and there's an iPad and you select all your features and here's your embryo and now take that home and good luck.
Off to the races.
Off to the races. So you'll notice too, we eliminated Dr. JK from this because his answers are also very boring, right? It seems like he is like gung-ho, he's just gonna be in favor all the way. So now it's just Michael and I that are gonna be floating around the screen. So once again, we'll give you like 2-3 minutes, talk about this one. All right, so once again, only one volunteer. So whoever's, we see their hand first or first to the mic. Again, we'd love to hear everyone's perspectives. Just for the sake of time, we'll take one volunteer. If you want to share what you were talking about. Doesn't even have to be your perspective. It could be what your neighbor talked about.
They only get harder from here, so this would be a good one to get.
Yeah. These are 3-minute hot takes.
Yeah,
Yes.
come on up.
Come up to the microphone. Round of applause for our volunteer. Thank you.
So we discussed the fact that imagine if you were a kid and you found out that you're not good at sports because you love this sport and you've worked hard at it, but because your parents chose for you to be naturally strong, and suddenly, what are you? You're not strong because you are. You're strong because you were chosen to be. You were forced to be. At what point are you not yourself? You were chosen for that, not on day one, not because you evolved as a human to be like that. And then also, at what point, if humans give ourselves whatever traits we want, at what point are we not human anymore? It just takes away all autonomy for what reason?
Great, round of applause. Thank you, it's a great observation. Yeah, it's actually, one of the problems that people will raise with enhancement technology generally, whether it's something like genetic engineering or whether it's something like performance-enhancing drugs, right, or whether it's using Adderall to help you study, like you can kind of go across the board, is that there's these questions of...
Your parents secretly injecting you with steroids before practice or whatever, right?
Yeah, right, the question is exactly what your question is in some sense, am I losing my own ownership of the action I'm performing? How much of it was me? How much of it was the substance? How much in this case was my parents' decisions to alter my genome? And I think it gets especially tricky when it's not even you making the decision, but it's your parents making the decision. So it's a great observation. Here's where we land. Again, I'm boring. I'm against again. It's gonna be kind of a spoiler alert for the rest of the presentation. Here though, I think, maybe if I could highlight a little different reason of why I wind up here. I think sort of this goes back to this idea of a misplaced and misguided understanding of what makes a good human life. I think that if this is an option that's available to us, we inevitably are always going to sort of, as human beings, we like want to be this one version of the best that's handed to us. And in choosing that misguided vision of what the good or perfect human life is, we inevitably miss out on other ways of living a good human life. So I think like that's baked into this model. We're inevitably like, even if you can say, pick whatever you want, we're all gonna kind of pick the same things. And in picking the same things, we're gonna miss out on, there's a whole lot of other different options in which we can live good and meaningful lives. Burns, why are you in ambiguous territory here?
I'm in ambiguous territory here. This one's a tough one for me. I think, how do I put it this way? the closest thing I could think of here would be something, again, like either steroids or maybe something more controversial like cosmetic surgery, right? Cosmetic surgery is something where if people are unhappy about themselves, not for therapeutic reasons, but for some type of enhancement, they're going to undergo a surgical procedure. I used to be a little bit more flippant about it, like, oh, I can't believe these people are going to get cosmetic surgery. But then the more I thought about it, the more I talked to people, the more you realize that a lot of times people end up getting cosmetic surgery because there's just something that makes them just mentally unwell. They're just very unhappy with the way, maybe they need a nose job, maybe they want to become 2 inches taller, whatever it happens to be, and that one small thing can have a profound impact on their well-being. Okay, and in that context, I think extending some grace to people in that context makes sense, which is where the enhancement stuff is a little bit funny, right? Because is it an enhancement if it's actually still improving your well-being? I don't know. I think I would be more in favor of it, except for the fact that something that we haven't spent too much time digging into is that this becomes something that it's not a decision that you're just making for yourself and your child. It would be your child and your grandchild and your great-grandchild and your great-great-grandchild and your great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. This becomes a permanent thing. The panacea to this, though, is because obviously if genetic engineering is so easy and cheap, you get it reversed. So, I mean, but this is all in fairy tale land. I think more realistically speaking, an actual on-the-ground realistic scenario would be something like it gets better, it becomes more affordable, but it's difficult to reverse because every time you do it, there's going to be some potential for unintended consequences.
Well, one other thing you were mentioning to me, Burns, while you all were talking, we were talking too, because this is what we like to do. We like to debate this stuff about downstream effects too that might be sort of unintended consequences. So it's sort of a very practical. But did you want to share a little bit more about that?
Well, I mean, so something that you learn if you ever take a genetics class is that you do these fun things. Anybody do Punnett squares like in high school genetics or whatever? Okay, they're fantastic. They're great. Do you know how many genes that actually applies to? Like 4, right? Like that's, they're useful as a way to sort of understand dominance and recessiveness, but the vast majority of traits that you exhibit are what are called polygenic, which means you're not going to make like one change in one gene and necessarily change how tall you are. I mean, you could. I mean, so you could make a gene change so that you make more human growth hormone. But it turns out that that's actually a disorder. It's called gigantism. People like Andre the Giant, for instance, is humongous. And what was the gene disorder he had? He had basically he had a hypersecreting anterior pituitary gland, which means he just had tons and tons of human growth hormone, and he died early because it turns out that comes with all sorts of unintended side effects. Height, there's at least 200 genes involved in height, so I don't know what other things you're going to do besides human growth hormone. Strength is an interesting one. It turns out that a lot of muscle mass is regulated by a gene called myostatin, and then I'll shut up, otherwise I'll just talk for the whole rest of the time about different things we could modify in people. Myostatin is exactly what it sounds like. So myo is a root for muscle, so like muscle cells, and statin means to stop. So there's a gene in all of our bodies called myostatin, and what myostatin does is it says your muscles will grow and develop, and then they will stop, because you don't need crazy amounts of muscle, right? So it's a metabolic expenditure. If you have too much of it, it means you need a lot more calories to stay alive and healthy, so you set that. But we all know people, and especially if you do a lot of athletics, you'll see these people who rock around and they're just huge. And you're like, man, you must spend all day in the gym. They're like, no. Like, what? They're like, I'm just naturally huge. I'm very strong. And it turns out that a lot of times what that means is there are natural variants of myostatin that exist in the population where some people have very low expression levels. So you could totally do a thing where you knock out or break the myostatin gene, which it turns out we've actually done. You can Google this very quickly if you want. They've done it in mice, and they have these mice and these rats that are just like the most hulked out looking little freaks you've ever seen. You could totally do that for your kid. Wouldn't that be great, Joe?
Yeah. I was going to say, Burns is not talking hypothetically. He has actually genetically engineered mice before. So.
I have made transgenic mice before, but for much more boring stuff like cancer research. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
Tricky.
Good.
Tricky.
So, Burns tricky. I'm still against it. Case study number 3. This is where I think things get really interesting. So part of what we're trying to show you too is that sometimes productive disagreement involves digging down a little deeper, right? So you could start out with the question, are you in favor or against genetic engineering? And even I would say it depends. It depends if you're talking somatic cell or germline. And then I have a pretty hard stance. But even that first question is like, well, no, you can't answer this question. We can't have a debate until you've dug a little bit deeper in. So I think part of what we wanted to show you today is the way different cases, you might have different intuitions, your moral reasons might go different, and that you really need to understand the issue at stake, in this case the science, the ethical moving parts, and only then can you start having meaningful conversations and debates.
All right.
So here's case study number 3.
4.
4.
Yeah, anyway. 30 years from now, so again, we're nebulously in the future, we're facing a population threat to humanity, so there's some new superbug, a new virus, whatever going around, and we don't have a treatment for it. Like we're all gonna die, okay? It's got 100% mortality
You're
rate.
toast.
Yeah, we're all toast. However,
but there's hope for your kids.
we're in a laboratory, this is like Fallout style stuff, right? You're down in a bunker.
We both read a lot of sci-fi.
Yeah. We can germline gene edit a new generation of humans to be immune. Should we do it or not?
Everyone got this?
Tricky.
You're hunkered down in the bunker. Yeah, do you genetically engineer your offspring so they can be immune to it?
Yeah, or do we just say,
Take 3 minutes.
Adios?
All right, we'll bring you back. Do we have a volunteer? Don't be shy.
Yeah, we got a volunteer. Come on up, buddy. Yay!
Yay, round of applause for a volunteer.
We're going to find out if he gets the correct answer or not. That's going to be great. Not you, of course, the whole crew that you're with. Yes.
Hello? All right. I personally decided that I would be in favor for this to give our children the immunity to the superbug, because we're all going to die anyway, but we're going to want the human race to continue on. And from the sounds of it, there is no negative repercussions of giving the immunity to our children. So thus, there's no real downside besides the fact that we're all going to be dead and we can't really raise our children. But they'll find the way.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much.
One more round of applause.
All right. So in other words...
Yeah, so us being toast is a downside, but other than that, you can save your kids and the future generations. Seems like there's a lot of upsides.
The cost-benefit analysis is pretty lopsided.
Yeah. Here's where I'm guessing I'm an outlier. I'm still against it.
Did we have anybody?
Did we have anyone? We won't make you talk. Did anyone else say that you were actually against it still? Okay,
All right.
good. So we have a few.
There we go.
So here's the justification I want to give you for why I'm against it. And it's going to point back to this idea that there's something wrong with the action itself, right? That we're treating these embryos as products rather than as humans with dignity. The best analogy I can think of where you would be committed to saying there's something intrinsically problematic, even though committing that thing would lead to really great consequences, is in cases of, the best thing I can think of here, there's not a one-to-one analogy, but in cases of torture, right? So you might think that torture, and I think this is probably one that's more commonly held, you might think that torturing another human being is just never allowed. It's just sort of, it's intrinsically immoral, you're violating human dignity, you can't torture people. Imagine though, you're a CIA operative 30 years from now, we'll just keep with the theme, and you have a terrorist, and you know this person is a terrorist, you know they're a bad person. You also know that you've sort of been trying as hard as you can to get information about them because you know they've got a big plot and they're gonna kill a lot of civilians. And you're also-
They're gonna kill everybody.
We'll make it, they're gonna kill everybody. Or yeah, we'll try and make this as close as you can, right? They're gonna kill everybody. They've got a bomb that can destroy the world. This is 30 years from now. The nukes have gotten gigantic, right? And you know that by torturing them, or you're pretty confident that by torturing them, you could extract the information you need to stop the plot. I want to say in that case that if torture is intrinsically wrong, it's still wrong to torture the person, even if the consequences are like through the roof, obviously good consequences. So I want to say something similar is true here. That even if you can prevent this mass extinction event, even if obviously we all agree those are good consequences. We don't want our children to all go extinct and be toast as well. I mean, everyone agrees with that. I think we can also agree that everyone would understand the person who says, I'm going to genetically modify these embryos in order to, it's like, well, yeah, I guess that makes sense rationally. I still want to say you've done something morally wrong because you've done something intrinsically wrong, in the same way that you can't torture a person and say, I tortured them and I got the information, so I saved a whole bunch of people. That's the best way I can justify this to you. And again, kind of doing a callback to this idea of the very engineering itself being the problem and not the consequences of that engineering. And this is one where Burns is a consequentialist. I'm a Catholic philosopher, so we have very different takes on this one.
Not to nitpick anything, but no metaphor is perfect, and I think that comparing torture to engineering an embryo is a little bit hyperbolic. But
no, I agree, and it's not a one-to-one.
And I don't mean that as a critique.
No.
I'm just saying that any metaphor.
The
is
analogy,
imperfect.
though, is that I would describe both as intrinsically immoral.
Sure.
So they're both actions that you can't, even if you have the best possible consequences, you still can't do them.
Excellent. Agree to disagree.
Yeah.
All right. Last one.
Last one, and then we have we'll be able to have a little time for a Q&A, at least 10 minutes or so, and still wrap up at 6. Here's the last one, and this one's a little tricky, but I think it's an important qualification. This one, it's the same case study as 4. We're still hunkered down in our bunkers. This time, though, we're not going to engineer the embryos. Instead, we're going to engineer the gamete cells and then have those gamete cells in turn form embryos that have the natural immunity, and that's the way you do it. So you're not engineering the embryos, you're engineering the parents, and then having the parents reproduce, and then they sort of naturally yet unnaturally, because they're passing on genetically engineered gametes to their children, and then this is what allows them to survive the global catastrophic event.
Long story short, you're engineering sperm and eggs, right? So basically,
you're engineering sperm and eggs instead of embryos.
And there are actual protocols for doing this. In animals that are under development, the protocol is aptly named iGonad. So if you're in a biology class, you'd like to write a research paper on a paper, the iGonad protocol is all about how you genetically modify the oocytes, which are precursor egg cells that are found in ovaries, and I think they're also working on spermatogonia, which are the precursor cells to sperm, and therefore what that means is you don't have to screw around with microinjections, you don't have to do in vitro fertilization, you just have the genetically engineered germ cells in an animal, which then goes on to reproduce naturally, and the offspring are now genetically engineered, because that's where they came from.
All right, last time, 2 minutes with your groups. Do we have a final volunteer? That was not a full minute, but everyone was growing quiet. Yes.
Yeah, right up front. Yay.
Hey.
And also, he has a D&D shirt on.
Yeah.
I'd like you
we
all
both
to know.
We're both gamers and noticed your shirt.
I'd like you all to
yeah.
know that I gave up D&D tonight to be here with you. So.
I also haven't played in a hot minute, so I feel you. So I said I was in favor of it because very similar to the last prompt, this is literally to save humanity. But even I would say this is even less ethically problematic than the last prompt because it's not embryos, it's the parents themselves that we're genetically modifying, and they can choose for themselves what they want.
Okay.
Thank you. Round of applause. I actually agree with you. I'm mixing it up here a little bit. I don't totally know what I think about this one, but I'm more okay with this and have to think about it more. So why is that? I think it comes down to the fact, and Michael and I, we were talking about this the plane ride over. I think what it comes down to me is that, as you pointed out, I think it's a different action, even though you have the same goal. And the analogy we were running with, which isn't perfect, was the difference between planning to rob a bank and actually robbing a bank. Even though they have the same goal, they're different actions and are evaluated differently, right? So one is worse than the other. Robbing a bank is worse than planning to rob a bank. In this case, I think it's not a perfect analogy at all, but it's that modifying the parents to pass on the genes is one thing, even though you're aiming at the same thing, than it is to actively modify the embryo. So that was my take too, is that I'm not 100% sure that I'm in favor of it. I'm an optimist, I think, in many ways, but when it comes to this, I've been against everything. But this is one where I'm that actually might be okay. But I have to think about it more.
This one would be a good one to sketch out with symbolic logic to see if you can follow
Yeah.
exactly how this works. I think this one's fine, just like the last one.
And I think Michael doesn't think there's any difference between them.
I don't actually think there's much of a difference between the two because they are different actions, but the end goal is the same. And so you're getting to the same goal regardless.
Yeah, and I think that I think the way in which you're getting to the goal matters in this case. So, but that's again, it's sort of a classic ethics debate, whether you think the ends matter more or the means. And in this case, I would say actually the means are the most important thing, to the point that they outweigh the ends that you're looking at. So we thought we'd close, and then we have about 10 minutes for Q&A. I think we're going to wrap up around 6. If anyone wanted to ask questions or just chime in, this is where we thought we would do, is we've gotten into some pretty speculative territory, doing some sci-fi type stuff. We're hunkered down in bunkers and modifying gametes. I mean, it's gotten a little bit crazy in here. What are our actual predictions for what kind of ethical conundrums are we going to have to face in the next 10 years? Dr. Burns, what's your predictions?
So my prediction, and I don't think I'm far off on this, is that incredibly wealthy, powerful people with money either have already started doing this or will be doing it in the very near future. They've already done proof of principle. Dr. He already did proof of principle with it. He's already got dark money coming in from somewhere.
There was the hot mic moment a while back between between President Xi and President
yeah,
Hu.
there's all sorts of strange stuff where unethical people are interested in doing things regardless of the consequences. I think it's no surprise, like Elon Musk has how many children now? Like 8, 9 children? And I believe all of them have been born via in vitro fertilization. Warming up for something, I don't know.
Yeah, so my prediction is actually pretty similar to Burns's. So I think that genetic modification aimed at enhancement, so specifically for conferring desirable traits, will be sort of an underground thing among the rich and the powerful soon, because the tech is already there. It's just a matter of somebody being willing to try it and pay the right people off. And so again, like we said, Michael's literally just done this in a lab, just not with humans.
It's not, I mean,
it's not that hard.
It is technically challenging, but definitely, I mean, we do it with mice regularly, okay? You can find YouTube videos of people doing it there.
Yeah, so that'd be my guess. And I would add to that prediction that I think that in the next 10 years, and again, I'm against it, but I have a feeling that there will be germline genetic modification for therapy purposes in really prescribed cases that gets approved, where you can start doing this to embryos in ways that are, they say, you know, you've got to check this box, you've got to check this box, and it's got to be therapeutic, right? So it's not just make you very strong, but it's got to be to fix this or to fix that, and that you're going to get see some approvals sneaking through. Again, so far we've seen all kinds of approvals for somatic interventions, but I think you're going to start seeing germline ones sneaking through next. So that's our prediction.
Excellent.
That's it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. We have 9 minutes or so. Or no, we also have to do the post, right, John?
We also have a post quiz that we should. After the Q&A. Okay.
So
excellent.
we have to make sure everyone gets out at 6. Maybe we'll do like 5 or 6, 7 minutes of Q&A.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? You can ask us about anything.
We are open books.
Mm-hmm. We have someone coming up. Excellent.
Where do you think the line will be drawn for what counts as enhancement versus therapy? Like, would it be mental disorders like autism or ADHD? Like, where do you think that line is, and how do you think that will be, like, determined?
Sure. That's a great question. I think the line being drawn between therapeutic and enhancement, or, again, the predictions that you were saying about it's potentially likely that embryonic engineering to treat genetic disorders is probably on our horizon. My suspicion is they're going to start with a really low-hanging fruit, where there are genetic disorders that are known to be catastrophic and cause a great deal of suffering and early death. Things like epidermolysis bullosa, for instance, is a disorder. It's otherwise known as butterfly skin. It's where there's a mutation, usually in one of the collagen genes, which make up the extracellular matrix that holds your skin together. Children born with that mutation end up having butterfly skin. It's very delicate, so anytime they have any physical contact, it effectively blisters. They usually don't survive beyond their teens, and they effectively are just an open sore for their entire life. I believe somebody actually won a wrongful life lawsuit against their parents because their parents did genetic testing before they were born and knew that they were going to be born with epidermolysis bullosa and had them anyway, and that person experienced a lifetime of suffering before dying, but before that they took them to court and said, you should not have had me. This was not worth it. That is not everyone's experience with epidermolysis bullosa. There's lovely documentaries about people who live wonderful lives with epidermolysis. Well, fulfilled lives with epidermolysis bullosa.
Yeah, just to answer your question too, it's actually a really big debate in the philosophy literature where exactly you draw the line between therapy and enhancement. I think it's relatively uncontroversial that psychological treatments for mental illness or mental disease, or that's also going to be therapeutic. So sort of a classic case that I run with my students all the time is the difference between somebody taking Adderall for an ADHD diagnosis is pretty uncontroversially therapeutic, right? You're taking the drug in order to help you overcome something that you want to try and overcome, whereas somebody taking Adderall who absolutely does not have ADHD counts as an enhancement. So it's really tricky that enhancements are, and this is true for genetic engineering too, by the way, right, is the exact same technique can be treatment or therapy or enhancement in different cases depending on the context. And Adderall is a great case of that, right? For some people it's a treatment, for other people it's an enhancement. Same thing with genetic engineering. Depending what you're doing, it could be a treatment or it could be an enhancement. Yeah. Which makes us circle back to this idea that you can't just ask, sorry, I know I'm talking over you, Bruce, right? You can't just ask, is genetic engineering okay, or is genetic engineering an enhancement? You have to say, well, it depends, right? In some cases it is an enhancement. In other cases, it absolutely is not an enhancement. It's a treatment or therapy.
So there's two things related to your specific question. I think you mentioned autism explicitly. I don't believe the current understanding of autism spectrum would count as a disorder that requires fixing. I think that is the way that would ethically go, and I think there's even a case to be made for ADHD. ADHD is one of those disorders that makes it really difficult for people to thrive in a very specific Western context, and not so much in other contexts. So is it a disease that you don't fit in modern society?
No, it's a great observation. And I'm actually on the same page. There's a huge literature on what counts as illness or disorder too, and a lot of it is going to be context or cultural as well.
I mean, even for cases like blindness or deafness, there are individuals in those communities who are like, I'm fine. Like this is this is not something that needs to be fixed for me specifically.
Yeah. So all that's to say is your question's a really great one and a really complicated one. Like I've taught a grad seminar on just enhancement. It's really difficult to sort through some of these issues. Why do we use it? Well, in certain cases, the one I gave you was supposed to be really uncontroversial. My eyes, I just can't see anything. So my glasses, most people would say, well, that's a therapy or a treatment. Sure. And binoculars pretty clearly take it beyond normal functioning. So, but yeah, especially when it comes to things like ADHD or autism or a whole host of other things, it's really hard to draw the line exactly when something is going to be a therapy versus an enhancement. Yeah. So it's a really, really good question. We have time for maybe one more.
Other questions? I see somebody's twitching a little. We got somebody coming on front. Excellent.
So my question is about the last scenario we were talking about here, looking at the kind of extinction event of humans. And so this question is really directed at you, Joe, since you were opposed to this solution here. So imagining that you're in the bunker and you are, say, one of 10 elders in a decision-making position. The question is your position that this is ethically wrong for you and you as an individual would not choose to not participate in it? Or is it ethically wrong in that if it came to a vote, you would choose to vote and try to convince others to vote that no one should participate in this type of technology?
Yeah, good. Thanks for the question. I mean, my position is that it's ethically wrong, full stop. So yeah, I think I think that if I was in that position, I would try and argue that other people would also vote with me, because I think that making that decision would be the wrong decision. I think that maybe this is a slight distinction. It's psychologically understandable why you would do the wrong thing in that case. But I don't think that makes it into the right thing. I think it's still you doing the wrong thing, even if you're making the decision for other people. And it's one thing that I think is true of intrinsically wrong actions, is that they're not context sensitive. And that they don't vary from person to person. And we could debate for a long time about this and about which actions qualify. But again, I think Torture is another contender that probably more people would be on my side with. We'd say, no, there literally is no context in which torture is morally permissible. Same thing I want to say here. So yeah, it's not just my stance. It's not just sort of a context-specific thing. It's like, no, I think that's always wrong. So even if I'm voting on it for other people, I've got to vote that way because that's, I think, is a violation of dignity, basically.
Which leaves us with the interesting quandary, which we can leave them with. How far would you go to stop people from doing it? Would you sabotage the experiment, Joe? Would you?
That's a debate for another day.
Would
I
you
guess.
drain all the liquid nitrogen out of the tank that holds the embryos to prevent them
Well,
from being
you
engineered?
can't. Two wrongs don't make a right. So we'll end on that piece of philosophical wisdom, I guess.
All right. Well, food for thought. Thank you for your lovely participation.
Don't leave yet. You have one more thing to do.
There's one more thing.
Which is not us.
Wow. This is just the short notes that I have on a couple of pages of notes. Just a couple of observations. The multidisciplinary nature of the discussions that we're having here and elsewhere. So just with our discussion here, a few disciplines, a few areas of study, artificial intelligence, health, physical education, sociology, politics, law, and economics. That leads us to the idea of critical thinking, making sure that as part of our critical thinking, of course, we're bringing in a variety of disciplines. Person who had just asked a question about therapeutics. What do we mean by therapeutics? How do you define that? And what would be allowed? Which goes to that last question, in what ways would you stop certain steps that you think would be immoral? What steps would you take? That leads us to civic discourse, listening to other folks, learning, and then advocating. And how can you do that? Which leads us to one of the reasons why we're here, which is this is one of our events celebrating the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. To use our voices to help guide this ship of state. With that, I'd like to thank everyone who is here. I would certainly like to thank our panelists, Joseph and Michael. I'd like to thank Heterodox Academy for its support, Bridge USA and BridgeCortland. And also a special thanks to Jill Murphy in Health, who did the lion's share of the work in bringing all of us together. Thank you all.